Why is there a zero possibility of a China-US war? It's a crucial issue, and we're here to break it down. But first, what do you think are the key factors that make a China-US war highly unlikely? Tensions between the US and China often make headlines, but is actual war between the two powers really likely in the foreseeable future? In this video, we'll analyse the strategic, economic and political factors that make a shooting war between China and the US highly improbable. Is the threat of war between the US and China overblown, or are they on an unavoidable collision? Let's examine the evidence. With China, the Chinese Communist Party's political legitimacy rests heavily on its ability to provide continued economic growth and social stability for its citizens. A costly, damaging war with the US could severely undermine both and jeopardise the CCP's domestic control. The implicit deal the party has made with the Chinese public is that their authoritarian rule will be tolerated as long as living standards keep improving. A war would massively disrupt the economy, impacting everything from manufacturing and trade to consumer prices and employment. It would reveal the CCP's failings and severely erode their authority. Furthermore, Chinese society today is increasingly middle class with modern sensibilities. The prospect of sending their only children into a bloody conflict has little appeal. Chinese youth are more consumed with economic opportunity and material goods than nationalist causes. They would sharply oppose a war, jeopardizing their lifestyles and future prosperity. Within the US, there is very little appetite for another large-scale military engagement after 2 decades of war in the Middle East. The American public today is quite war-weary and focused more on domestic issues like the economy, healthcare, inequality, and political dysfunction. Additionally, without any major direct attack on US soil, there is little public will to enter a distant Pacific conflict with China. Unlike in World War II, today's Americans are not emotionally invested in confronting China military unless overtly provoked on US soil. This presents a serious political constraint. There are also growing concerns about any war's economic impacts. China represents a massive trading partner and source of imports for US businesses and consumers. Severing those ties through war could jeopardize jobs, raise consumer prices substantially, disrupt budgets, and cut into corporate profits. This gives the US business community an incentive to lobby strongly against war. In summary, domestic pressures in both nations steer leadership firmly against policies that could lead to war. The Chinese public cares more about prosperity than nationalism, while Americans have little appetite for another distant conflict. With little domestic advantage to gain from confrontation, diplomacy prevails. The deep economic ties between China and the United States create powerful mutual interest in avoiding conflict. Since diplomatic normalization in 1979, trade flows and financial linkages between the two powers have expanded enormously. This growing economic codependence makes military confrontation extremely disadvantageous. In 2021, annual US-China trade in goods and services exceeded $615 billion. This has more than doubled in the past decade. Billions of dollars flow between the two nations daily through imports and exports, spanning commodities, manufactured goods and technology products. Hundreds of major US and Chinese companies have extensive cross-border business partnerships. Additionally, American and Chinese companies have invested over $120 billion and $100 billion respectively into each other's economies over the past several decades. Major US corporations like Apple, Walmart, and General Motors rely heavily on Chinese factories, markets, and labor. Chinese firms likewise have substantial US investments. With such enormous bilateral trade and investment, a war severely disrupting economic links could be disastrous for major industries in both nations. Supply chains across technology, retail, agriculture, and other sectors would be massively impacted. The deep financial repercussions deter leaders who want stability. Furthermore, China holds over $1 trillion in US Treasury bonds and other government debt, an important tool ensuring US fiscal health. Waging war with its largest creditor would not be sensible economically. This gives China a reason to maintain America's prosperity. In summary, the symbiotic economic relationship between the two powers generates mutual interest in avoiding confrontation. The financial costs and disruptions for both countries would be enormous. This economic deterrence keeps pragmatic leaders committed to peaceful engagement. In terms of pure military might and capabilities, neither China nor the US has a clear superiority that would allow imposing their will on the other. This relative parity decreases incentives for either side to escalate to outright war. The US military retains several key advantages, including a much larger fleet, which advantages carriages and destroyers that will control Pacific Sea lanes. American air power remains foremost globally, with sophisticated stealth fighters and bombers that could penetrate China's defenses. The US also has far greater power projection capabilities, enabling worldwide reach. However, China's military modernization has significantly narrowed many capable gaps. Its naval fleet now numbers over 300 vessels and continues growing rapidly. Its missile arsenal is one of the world's largest, posing major threats to large targets like aircraft carriers. Ongoing advances in radar, cyber warfare, and other technologies also curb traditional US strengths. In a localized conflict over Taiwan, for example, China's home field advantage would be decisive. US bases in the region would face overwhelming missile strikes. China's airspace would be hotly contested, with US stealth only going so far against modern air defenses. Neither side sees easy victory in a Pacific war. More crucially, any limited conventional conflict risks spiraling into a nuclear war, which would be catastrophic. Both nations possess mature nuclear treads and second-strate capability, guaranteeing mutual destruction if such weapons are employed. This doctrine of mutually assured destruction remains the ultimate deterrent to thumping any conceivable military objectives. In totality, the modernized Chinese military presents the US from threatening regime change or other deep incursions into mainland China. And America's global force posture dissuades any Chinese invasion of US territory. Conquest is unrealistic. With neither side able to impose their will militarily, serious diplomacy prevails over a saber rattling. Does economic codependency and the nuclear threat make the US-China war unrealistic despite tensions? Additionally, in an interconnected world, the globally diplomatic backlash would be severe for whoever instigated the war. International institutions like the UN provide forums to de-escalate rather than fight. Globalization has simply raised the opportunity cost of war too high. Within both China and the United States, influential groups and leaders argue rationally that the military conflict would be ruinous. Their voices provide resistance to bellicose factions and promote wiser statesmanship. In China, progressive intellectuals and dissidents bravely question the Communist Party's aggressive nationalism, arguing it risks the stability and openness that has benefited China. Students, academics, journalists, and online activists increasingly demand transparency and accountability from the CCP rather than military adventures abroad. Their dissent is important. In America, the business community has vital interest in preserving amicable US-China trade relations from which they will profit immensely. Major corporations like Apple, GM, Boeing, and Wall Street firms lobby hard against policies or rhetoric that could jeopardize China's markets. This lobbying weighs heavily on politicians. Expert foreign policy thinkers in the US also produce credible arguments and scholarship detailing the horrendous costs and minimal benefits of war with China. Their impact on elite opinion should not be underestimated in steering policymakers towards cooperation. Globally, citizens and activist groups worldwide increasingly reject armed conflict, which inevitably causes severe human suffering. Through protests and media campaigns, they are able to voice ethical arguments directly to foreign audiences. World public opinion thereby exercises some restraint on the dangerous military ambitions of any government, including China's. In totality, these diverse voices argue that economy ties and global issues like climate change and health must take priority over zero-sum squabbling. Their council serves as an invaluable counterweight, providing space for leaders to craft wiser policies aligned with humanity's interests. There are never guarantees, but powerful constraints point to a US-China war being exceedingly unlikely and unwise. Greater leadership from individuals and institutions that recognize war's horrors is needed on all sides. With prudence, the difference between the two nations need not lead to catastrophe. In closing, a multitude of factors make armed US-China conflict improbable and counterproductive, despite tense relations. Domestic pressures, economic advancement, military deterrence, diplomatic realities, and voices of reason reinforce peace from all directions. There is wisdom to be found in leaders who can see past provocations and bellicosity. While history shows major wars do happen, we cannot become passive or fatalistic, given what's at stake. A thoughtful, reasoned public and its leaders must stand up for diplomacy over confrontation at this pivotal juncture. The futures of both nations depend on it. We would love to hear your perspective in the comments, and please subscribe for more geopolitical analyst videos. Let's keep the discussion thoughtful and productive.